Welcome back to the Monitor Brief. I'm Adam Lucente. Today is Monday, March 30th, 2026. U.S. President Donald Trump renewed threats on Monday against vital Iranian infrastructure, saying he would bomb electricity plants, oil wells, and Harg Island if the Strait of Hormuz is not fully reopened. The president told the Financial Times the U.S. may take the strategic island, which is Iran's primary oil terminal in the Gulf, but he added that they have a number of options. The same day, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio told ABC that the U.S. currently has 4 objectives in the war: destroying Iran's Air Force, Navy, and factories, and diminishing the Islamic Republic's missile launching capability. Meanwhile, U.S. Central Command announced on Saturday that the USS Tripoli arrived in the region, becoming the latest warship to do so. In this episode, we'll hear from El Monitor's Pentagon correspondent, Jared Szuba, about what exactly Trump's military options are against Iran. He provides a detailed assessment of the potential ground operations that might occur and why a full-scale invasion is unlikely, as well as the risks of moving U.S. troops closer to Iranian territory. We'll also discuss just how much damage the U.S. has done to Iran's conventional military capabilities and the level of damage to American assets in the region. Hope you enjoy. Jared, welcome back to the El Monitor Brief.
Adam, thank you for having me.
Yeah, Jared, there's been a lot of moving parts. It's good to finally sit down with you and talk about all these developments. I first wanted to go over, what are you hearing on the options on the table in terms of a troop buildup and a possible ground operation against Iran? What are the potential targets? How many forces are we talking? What's the latest on that?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's a bit complex. There's nothing immediately new this week, but as U.S. forces continue to sort of trickle or surge, if you will, into the region, it's worth taking account of what sort of capabilities they bring with them, because that's going to determine the options that the president has. Just over the weekend, the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, with roughly 2,200 U.S. Marines on board the USS Tripoli and its accompanying ships, arrived in the CENTCOM AOR. They will be joining or met by elements of the 82nd Airborne, its immediate response force, which is roughly a brigade combat team, 2,000 to 3,000 paratroopers, along with, of course, Special Operations Forces. So that's 160th SOAR, U.S. Army Rangers, JSOC elements, which specialize more specifically in going after high-value targets, infiltration of sensitive sites, perhaps Isfahan, etc. But the 11th MEU, which also has been tasked, won't get there for some time, so that the remainder of 2,000 to 2,500 additional Marines will probably not get there until midway through next month. That being said, these Marine Expeditionary Units, both the 11th and the 31st, are really a formidable force each. They're both self-contained forces, specialized in localized assault, embassy evacuations, amphibious landings. They can do air assault. They have V-22 Ospreys. They pack their own 155 millimeter artillery, M777 howitzers, F-35 fighters, and Cobra helicopter gunships for close air support. So, with the arrival of these Marines, what that does is it frees up commanders to sort of keep their other aircraft and artillery tasks on the operations at hand, while allowing the Marines to essentially sit, wait, and get ready for further orders for however they can be used as a self-contained unit. Now, I think it's really important to note that this is not going to be a full-scale, conventional territorial grab invasion of Iran. There's not going to be a 36-hour drive to Tehran, as we saw with the U.S. forces rushing to Baghdad in 2003. Just for rough back-of-the-napkin comparison, Iraq is roughly 440,000 square kilometers territorially, and the U.S. Invaded the country in 2003 with 150,000 troops. That's very roughly, one soldier or Marine for every 3 square kilometers of the country, and 5 to 6 aircraft carriers in that campaign. Iran, by comparison, is 1.65 million square kilometers. Iraq being 440,000, Iran 1.65 million, and there are roughly 4 to 6,000 U.S. ground troops either already in the region or on their way. So that's very roughly, very rough estimate. One soldier for every 330 square kilometers. That's just not what the United States is looking to do here. what these forces can do is assault into and seize coastal fortifications, hidden weapons caches near the Strait of Hormuz. The 82nd specializes in seizing airstrips, which, because they don't bring their own heavy equipment with, they can then use to land heavier equipment, artillery, heavy vehicles. For example, on Kharg Island, the 82nd elements could perhaps seize the ninth Iranian fighter base at Bandar Abbas, while the Marines are more specialized and likely maybe more focused on assaulting rural coastal fortifications, hunting for underground bunkers and tunnels containing RGC fast boats, missiles, mines. But it's worth noting there is significant risk in these sorts of operations.
Yeah, and Jared, I mean, what are those biggest risks, knowing the possible potential targets as you just laid out, what do you think there?
Yeah, I mean, it'll depend on the nature of the operation or operations, depending on whether the president authorizes, which sort of approaches. It depends on what the White House wants to do. If they want to prevent Iran from having this sort of last-ditch capability of littering the Strait of Hormuz with naval mines, say, which they haven't done yet, at least to, the degree they potentially could, the president could order, the U.S. Marines to land along Iran's southern coast and start rooting out underground caves, tunnels, and bunkers with these munitions, anti-ship missiles, um, because important to note, the trouble with this campaign from the U.S. perspective at this time is that these precision-guided munitions continue to threaten the Strait of Hormuz, which essentially means Iran has a veto on the economy there, which of course has global repercussions. So if you can send Marines into these sort of caves and bunkers, perhaps naval facilities on Kharg Island or some of the other islands in the Persian Gulf, which are territorially belong to Iran, they're going to be faced with almost certain booby traps, fortifications, false doors. Um, the IRGC is believed to have, 3 to 5, maybe 5 to 6,000 of these IRGC fast boats that are the vast majority of them, which are buried underground in bunkers. So you're talking about close quarters combat, potential booby traps. But more importantly than that, I think it's worth noting that these U.S. forces will be in much closer range to Iran's ballistic missiles and drones. We've just saw over the past couple of days, we saw a drone attack destroyed an E-3 AWACS command and control aircraft at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. Just hit it right in the tail, precision strike. That's more than 400 miles from the Iranian coast. And the closer you get into the Iranian coast, Kharg Island is roughly 20 miles off of Iran's coast, the more precise these Iranian projectiles become. So once you insert Marines, for example, hypothetically on Kharg Island, you then have to defend them. And that's going to be very hard to do because you're going to be in very close quarters, not only to fighting on the ground, but close range to Iran's ballistic missiles and drones fired from the mainland. And you can insert U.S. Navy destroyers into, through the Strait of Hormuz into the Persian Gulf, because commanders, if they do land them, are going to want to build a sort of multi-layered air defense umbrella to protect those forces. But even putting those ships through the strait and into the Persian Gulf is going to put those ships at significant vulnerability to Iran's anti-ship ballistic missile and other capabilities.
And Jared, my last question is kind of a two-part one. I mean, one thing I'm wondering, and many people are wondering, is, what do we know about the damage inflicted on Iran in this war? We have what the U.S., CENTCOM, and what the Israeli military has been saying. How do you see the amount of damage?
Yeah, it's an important question because we're hearing quite a lot from the Pentagon, these sort of rolling accounting numbers of how many conventional assets have been destroyed. Part of the Iranian military, their navy surface fleet is sunk, their submarines are sunk, their ballistic missile manufacturing is on the rocks. But the real question here is how much closer is the U.S. to achieving its strategic objectives? Secretary Rubio outlined these military objectives earlier today, saying the destruction of the Iranian Air Force, destruction of the Iranian Navy, the quote severe diminishing of their missile launch capacity, and the destruction of their missile and drone factories. Now, those are four tactical, sort of operational military objectives, but none of them uh, show any clear mechanism to achieving the U.S. strategic objective, which is ending Iran's nuclear enrichment program and capabilities. Now, the way Rubio and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth have couched it in recent weeks is essentially saying that if you destroy Iran's conventional military shield, it won't be able to sustain any future nuclear enrichment. We can just simply bomb it at will, and we can do midnight hammer again and again if they try to recover any nuclear, highly enriched uranium or centrifuges. But the mechanism, whereby they intend to continue doing that with or without a conventional Iranian military intact is not clear. You saw reporting over the weekend that the White House is considering some sort of ground operation, inserting forces to secure the highly enriched material, more than 440 kilograms of it, believed to be buried at Isfahan and likely at other sites throughout the country. These are extraordinarily complex operations, which would ostensibly have to be done under fire, under hundreds and hundreds of tons, presumably of rubble, extracting this material, safely extracting it from the country. And it's very hard to imagine that the president would authorize that while the guns are still firing and the drones and the ballistic missiles are still incoming, because that would be a very dangerous, an extraordinarily dangerous operation, not to mention the complexity of it.
And what do we know about how much Iran has inflicted on the bases where U.S. forces are stationed? Obviously, there's a lot of talk in Iranian media about this. What are you hearing on that?
The Pentagon, of course, has not been keen to advertise its losses in this conflict. As we've seen, a number of KC-135 refueling tankers, and just over this past weekend, at least one E-3 Sentry aircraft, a mobile command and control station, was knocked out. So there certainly is damage to U.S. capabilities. The USS Gerald R. Ford, which is the newest and largest U.S. aircraft, actually the largest aircraft carrier in the world, is currently out of the fight off the coast in the Eastern Mediterranean, after what Pentagon officials have described as a sort of out of control fire that started in the laundry facilities of the ship. But of course, Iran has been claiming credit for triggering damage with its own attacks, though that has not been confirmed. But yeah, it's tough to get precise details about how much damage has been inflicted on the U.S. fleet. We did see an FA-18 last week appeared to be in video that circulated online, hit by a surface-to-air missile. And that's not likely the last of Iran's surface-to-air capabilities, despite the degradation of its sort of conventional stationary anti-aircraft materiel. So keep an eye on that. The Iranians still have the capability to do a significant amount of damage, especially as or if and when U.S. forces move in closer to the Iranian coast, which they are quite far away from now.
Jared, thanks a lot for all your insights and details on this topic, and we look forward to more of your reports from Washington.
Adam, thanks so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to the Al Monitor Brief. Be sure to follow Al Monitor for more on the stories impacting the Middle East. Until next time, I'm Adam Lucente.
Today's transformation of the Middle East is at the center of global geopolitics. Whether you're an analyst, diplomat, executive, or academic, you need the best reporting and analysis to understand what's really happening on the ground and what it means for the world. Al Monitor is the award-winning independent leader in Middle East news. From Riyadh to Beirut, Abu Dhabi to Doha, and Baghdad to Tehran, our team of over 100 expert journalists report daily on the top stories driving the regional trends. Download our mobile app and subscribe to Al Monitor to follow what leaders and decision makers are reading every day. Go to almonitor.com, that's AL-MONITOR.com, and use promo code POD25, POD25 for a discount.